Generative AI is here, and you've probably seen people use it to write papers, to debug some code, maybe even write some music. In fact, the music that you're listening to right now was completely generated by artificial intelligence. But AI still has one major flaw: it's not an expert, but you as a human can be. Here's why that matters. So let's just be clear. When I say AI is not an expert, I'm going to focus specifically on generative AI, in this case, large language models, just because that gives us a point of comparison to talk about. And when we're talking about large language models not being an expert, I think it's important first to define what an expert is, or maybe how an expert deals with new situations. How does an expert problem solve? And let's start off by drawing a simple and oversimplified representation of all of human knowledge. All of human knowledge, I'm going to say, is encapsulated in this shape over here. Let's do best case scenario that all of human knowledge that I've just drawn has been captured in text and has been given to the large language model for training. Again, this is not true. Not all of human knowledge has been captured in text, and large language models have not been trained on all the text that has ever existed, but this gives us a nice starting point. So if you, as a human, have knowledge, what you can kind of see is that, yeah, you know some things. You know a couple of facts and ideas spread across this space, but you're probably an expert in a couple of different domains. When that's the case, the knowledge that you have acquired and the knowledge that you have learned tends to cluster. And so if I am drawing this out, maybe let's say that I have two very important expertises that are separate. What you can see is there is all of the experience and all of the knowledge that I've gained in these two different regions. Let's say skill A and skill B, or field A and field B. So what does an expert do? How does an expert deal with new problems? Because we're really just talking about problem solving here. And when an expert is presented a problem within their domain, what they're really good at is identifying what are the best potential candidate solutions. Experts are really good at eliminating bad candidate solutions, and they can do this fairly quickly. So just to give you an example of what we're talking about so that we have a nice little visual, let's say that we're presented with a problem where the answer to that problem, like, we don't know what the answer is just yet, but we know that it's within our expertise. We know that it's in our domain, and we can kind of guess that it's like over here somewhere. Again, we don't know it yet. Maybe no human in the world knows it yet if you're doing some scientific research or exploring some new idea, but we can kind of isolate, at least in a fuzzy way, the fact that the information we're looking for is somewhere in that region. So what can an expert do? An expert is going to see this, and the expert is going to have many, many data points to compare to this, many different experiences, many different facts, many different pieces of information, pieces of knowledge that they've acquired over time, and they can pretty much zone in on the best candidate solutions in a quick amount of time. Meaning that if this is the space that we're given and you're an expert in this field, you probably have some intuition to tell you that maybe the answer is close to these three solutions that you've experienced in the past. Why this is really important is because it really narrows down the space and allows a much smaller space that you can explore to try to figure out, is the answer to your problem there? Is it in between the gaps of things that you already know very well? So that's what an expert does. A non-expert or a novice, they don't have this zoomed in view. Their view is way out here, and their search space is a little bit more fuzzy. Maybe they kind of understand that the answer that they're looking for lies in this space, but they don't really know the best place to start. Even if they could zoom in, even if a novice could isolate this into a particular field, and best case scenario, maybe they have access to this knowledge, a non-expert is going to consider a candidate solution really far away from the problem and a candidate solution really close to the problem exactly the same. And again, the first time we actually saw this, there were some scientists that were studying what is the difference between a grandmaster chess player and an amateur chess player. Sure, grandmaster chess players know a lot more, but what they were actually able to do was hone in onto the 2 or 3 best next moves with an intuition and an understanding of why those were the best next moves, and then really sit and evaluate what are the consequences of those 3 moves. Whereas a novice, right? A novice is going to say, well, what if I move my knight? What if I move my bishop? What if I move my rook? They have many, many different candidates that they can select for. It becomes really overwhelming and doesn't really allow the novice chess player to get to the solution quickly or even at all. Okay, so if that is how an expert deals with new information, let's think about what large language models do. Because one of the biggest misconceptions is that large language models know what they've been trained on. That is not true at all. Large language models actually do not have any knowledge. They don't know what is true. Things that they've been fed are typically unlabeled. And so all that large language models are doing is gathering all of the text and trying to figure out the associations of different words or different tokens or different parts of words that kind of go together statistically. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not information there. I want to be clear. There is a ton of information there in that statistical relationship between words, but that's different than knowledge. That's not what experts are using to arrive at their candidate solutions. They're actually using previous experience, things that they have learned, things that they have incorporated into their minds as facts to try to narrow down their search. Large language models cannot do that because they don't have knowledge. And so the way that you want to think about this is if there's a large language model that's been trained on a bunch of text to find out how words are associated together, you feed it a prompt. The best case scenario is throughout this entire domain of knowledge, the problem that you are trying to solve has been solved by many people before, has been written about a lot before, and actually shows up in the training data set. If that's the case, you might be very successful at narrowing down that giant piece of knowledge to a handful of potential candidates. This is the very, very best case scenario. This usually happens if you are trying to answer questions that are already well captured and represented in the training data. But what ends up happening is if you are trying to pursue science, for example, and you're trying to ask a question that no one has the answer to, either the large language model is going to not know exactly what to do with new knowledge and instead generate a much larger space, while technically encapsulating the answer you're looking for is also encapsulating all of this other stuff that is a little bit outside of that specialty, outside of that expertise. This is what happens when you ask an LLM a question and it spits back out a super generic answer. Sometimes it puts together words that make sense but don't really answer your question. Usually we can use statistics to narrow in on something that we've seen before, but if we haven't seen it at all, there's only so much that statistical associations of words can actually do. And so this leads to very generic answers. It's not great. There's a worse thing that happens when you're asking questions of LLMs that aren't rooted in knowledge and don't have that background knowledge. And that is, what if you're generating this search space and it, again, is technically encapsulating the information that you want, but it's also incorporating all of this information outside of human knowledge, outside of what has been captured in the training data. Best case scenario, that is completely true information that humans have just not discovered yet, or it just wasn't captured in the training data. That's the best case scenario. But more often than not, when you start to access some word associations that are on the fringes of what was used to train the large language model, this is where we start making stuff up. All of this, even though they are words that go together statistically very well to make an argument or a sentence that sounds right, It's not rooted in any knowledge. It's not rooted in anything that any human has ever discovered or thought of. It's not rooted in truth. This is hallucination. This is the large language model making stuff up. And again, that is a very, very dangerous thing if you are not critical about what the large language model is giving you, or if you just don't understand what a hallucination is. So let's just talk about hallucination for a second. Hallucinations are incredibly convincing. They're also incredibly wrong. And large language models can do this because they are not rooted in knowledge. They're just rooted in statistical information, in how certain words give other words meaning without actually knowing what that meaning is. So if experts are so good and large language models are so bad, you might think that my position is that experts should never use large language models. And I don't think that's the case at all. I actually think that experts are some of the best users of large language models, and they're positioned in a way to use it in the best way possible. So let's take a look at this. Let's redraw that situation in which we use a large language model to try to come up with an answer to your question. We've kind of identified as an expert that the solution we're searching for is within our expertise. And let's say the large language model gives us that. It is overlapping our expertise, which is what we expect, but it's not quite all the way there. If you are a non-expert, if you don't have this body of knowledge, if you don't have that experience, if you don't have that intuition, it's very difficult to tell, is this off? Is this what the large language model, what it provided you, is that encapsulating the answer you're actually looking for? It's the first problem. And the second problem, even if you identify that it's missing something, if you are not an expert, how are you going to follow up with a large language model to try to move this? Oftentimes what you'll see experts doing is changing their prompts or building their prompts, or after getting feedback from a large language model, trying to ask a slightly different question or provide different resources to try to move what the LLM is giving you. And if you're not an expert, you don't know where to move this search space. But if you are an expert, you have a better chance of actually moving what the LLM is providing to you to overlap with where you expect that candidate solution to actually be. So again, anybody can do this. Anybody can prompt multiple times. My argument is that if you are already an expert, even if you don't know what the answer is, but you're familiar with that field, you have a better chance of moving this search space to overlap more closely with the solution that you're looking for. Let's draw another scenario, because we've made one big assumption about this. We've assumed that the piece of knowledge that we're trying to find, the solution that we are trying to discover, lies exactly inside of our domain of knowledge. Sometimes that's the case. If you're lucky, that's going to be the case. But because we have never observed this before and we don't know the answer, we can hypothesize that this is where the answer is going to be. But this answer might be somewhere else. So here's the issue with this, right? If we're slightly off, maybe we're over here somewhere, right? But we hypothesize that the candidate solution has to be in here within our expertise. What are we going to do? We're going to focus on a couple of candidates that we think are good. You can design experiments and try to search the space in between to try to get this information that is in between, but you're never going to get your answer if your answer doesn't actually exist in that space. And again, you don't know where the answer is a priori. And so how can LLMs help here? Remember what LLMs do. They're like this generic circle, trying to close down all these associations of words into something forming maybe like a coherent sentence. A great thing about large language models is that there's also a chance that they can expand your knowledge a little bit. A large language model might force you to think, well, maybe it's not in expertise A, but the large language model starts getting you to think about, well, what about expertise B? You can actually start to see some hidden relationships that we can't see as humans because we're very limited. Sometimes we get so laser focused in our expertise and we think that the answer is going to be right here, when in fact what we really need to do is zoom out a little bit. And large language models, because of their nature, they're really good at helping us zoom out if you know how to prompt the large language model to do that. And so what's really interesting is using large language models to bridge different levels of expertise, or even to inspire an expert to push the boundaries of their expertise into a new domain, into a new region. This happens all the time. This happens in my research all the time. I love trying to figure out solutions to my problems and then realizing that, like, oh, there's a creative solution that I never thought of that exists just slightly out of my reach. But because I'm an expert, I know how to push my expertise out into different directions. All I really needed was the push to say, well, maybe you should explore a different space to bridge things in. Here's another way that large language models can really help experts. Let's say that the answer that you are searching for does lie within your expertise, your domain of knowledge. Say that's where the true answer is. The problem with this, as a human, as a limited human, you don't have the space in your brain to remember everything that you've learned and everything that you've experienced. So even though this might be your domain of expertise, maybe right now at this given time, maybe you have forgotten all of these things that you experienced in the past. It's totally possible, right? We forget things all the time. And so again, using a large language model is really helpful here, because if we can use our expertise to really hone in on candidate solutions, what a large language model can do is remind us, oh yeah, there was this solution. Oh yeah, there was this technique. Oh yeah, there was this piece of literature that I had once learned, but I had forgotten about. And that kind of helps us expand our bubble. And again, the major goal of large language models interacting with experts, in my opinion, is to help experts zoom out a little bit, to see the bigger picture. Because again, that is something that we as humans are just not really good at doing. Okay, so I want to leave you with 3 big summary points. And the first one has to do with how experts navigate new information or new problems. One of the most important things that experts do is use their knowledge, use their intuition, use their experience to very, very quickly eliminate bad candidate solutions. It's just a lot easier to deal with problems when you can narrow down the things that you need to try to get to your solution, or you can at least prioritize, I should try this, I should try this, I should try this. That is something that is very, very important to expertise that you can only do if you are knowledgeable. The second thing that I want to leave you with is this idea that while large language models capture information and can provide information, it's your job as a human to supply the knowledge. This is a very empowering thing, because this is something that humans can do that machines, at least currently, cannot. We have the knowledge. We can ground things in truth. We can ground things in fact. We can ground things in things like the scientific method, which large language models can convince us maybe that they do, but they absolutely do not do that. The last little point that I do want to mention is that while large language models do have some drawbacks, and you should be very, very careful of those drawbacks, they can help experts a lot, especially when experts have gaps in knowledge. And let's be real, everyone has gaps in knowledge, whether it's because you've forgotten something or because you just haven't pushed your knowledge or pushed your brain into that direction or into that field just yet. We all have gaps. And large language models can help us unlock new possibilities or new potential in what we pursue and what knowledge we acquire by just showing us some, candidate solutions, right? So hopefully this was good inspiration for you to continue becoming an expert, to really motivate you to continue learning, continue developing your skills, to really acquire that knowledge. And hopefully this helped you understand the role of large language models in helping us become better experts. So until the next video, I'll see you next time.